Good morning. I'm Steve Weber, and I am the host of the American Gumption Morning Show. Welcome to Wednesday, December 30th, second to the last broadcast of 2020. And exciting show coming up. I'm going to have my guest, Victoria Reynolds, joining us at about 15 past the hour. And we're going to get into her story, and we're going to talk a little bit about how my story and her story have a crossover, which is one of those weird coincidences, except there are no coincidences. We're all connected. And that's going to be my monologue today. We're all connected. And so I'll tell you the story of how I came to believe that and really, really believe that. So that's coming up in just a minute. All right, let me tell you what's happening tomorrow and then the first part of next week and over the weekend. There's a few things going on too. So tomorrow, the last show of the year, and actually it's an important show because it's show number 100 that I'll do, and I'm very proud of that. It's been 5 months, so I've done an average of 20 a month. The first few months I did 20 or 21, and then 19 and 18. But anyway, we're going to end the year right at the 100 mark, and Walt Keller is going to join us tomorrow. Walt is a real live Hollywood actor, except it's not the normal Hollywood actor story. Walt was in his late 40s, sells his business in Denver and moves to LA 4 years ago and breaks into the acting business. So we'll get into his story. It's really a good story. And we actually met through the lookalike world. So there's a connection. There's another connection. There's another coincidence. Except there are no coincidences. We're all connected together. All right. So Walt Keller tomorrow. Now, Friday night, I'm not going to do a broadcast on Friday morning, New Year's Day, oh, wait a minute. I'm jumping ahead. I'm not going to do a broadcast on Friday morning, January 1st, 2021. All right. Okay. I am correct in that. Now, what's going to happen on Thursday night, on New Year's Eve, is Spirituality Gone Wild. It's going to broadcast a couple of hours. It's going to basically be a musical show, but myself and some of the other co-creators will be recording little messages, and we'll be adding those in. So I'll be sending my message over to Debbie G today, and that will happen. I believe it's going to be from 8 until 11 on the West Coast. So that would be like what? Starts at 11 to 2 on the East Coast. So that's why I said, hey, forget it. I'm not I can't do that. I gotta be asleep. All righty. And then on New Year's Day, we're going to kick off Spirituality Gone Wild. So on January 1st, Friday in the afternoon, there's going to be a couple of the co-creators are going to come on and offer courses and talk about what we're going to be doing, kicking your year off, getting your year started. And then those will happen every Sunday throughout the rest of 2021. So that's what's happening. So a lot of good things are going on with Spirituality Gone Wild, and just honored and happy to have them as my broadcast partner. Now, Monday, I don't have my primary guest lined up yet. May or may not happen. We may just take care of housekeeping things. But Joan of Angels will join us at the last segment for about 15 minutes. She's been a guest. She's started a regular show where she comes in and just sort of gives her wisdom and her miracle making message. And so she'll be at the end of Monday's show. And then on Tuesday, Paul Sterling, who is a relationship coach and the author of Argue Less, Love More. Imagine a relationship that you argue less and you love more. Yeah, that sounds like that sounds like a show I better pay attention to. I like that idea. All righty. So that'll be Tuesday. And then we've got things happening, the rest of the week. I'll get into that next week. All right. Now, my main monologue is we are all connected. And some of these things I'm going to talk about, I've shared different bits and pieces of them over the last several months, but I'm going to frame it in a different way. And again, I'm titling it, We Are All Connected. And so 2009, and this is something I've talked about, 2009 was my year of transformation when I went, something has to change. I can't go on, doing things exactly the way I've been doing them and expect that something different is going to happen. I had been living only in Montana for about a year. The financial crisis had hit the year before that. I was like scrambling to try to figure out how I'm going to make all of this work. I had properties, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, but I got, and I was also trying to develop my motivational message. I was still working for Bubba Gump, kind of wrapping up that whole piece of it, but it was really winding down. And I had figured that I had discovered that as a speaker, I actually had to have a message that I was talking about, and telling jokes and entertaining was, probably what a stand-up comedian does, but not what a speaker does. And so I realized I needed to develop my message. And the realization that I need to develop my message was like, oh my gosh, I have to do some work on myself, and I have to, change some of my beliefs and some of my thinking. So that all occurred in 2009 when all those things coincided, and I went, okay, we got to wake up here. But introduced to me at that time was the idea of connectedness and separation, and I started just thinking about the planets and the stars, and like it's like they circle around, and these big massive planets and energy, and being emitted from them, and I just started thinking like there's a connection between all this stuff, and of course other things I was reading at the time. So but I didn't quite have it all. That connectedness didn't quite make sense at that point, but that was really like the opening. Now, 4 years later, at the end of 2013, I went back and I did some review work with the same organization that I had worked with in 2009. And so I went back and I was kind of reviewing and repeating information that I had, done in that whole year. And so a lot of the foundational thinking that they wanted me to think about, those pieces were in place. Like I had done a lot of the introspective work and had that all kind of lined up. But in 2013, I went back and there was just this one simple exercise that they had us go through, but it kind of hits you like a ton of bricks, as the expression says. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was able to connect dots that I had arranged different pieces, but suddenly I was able to look at them very differently. So that was the aha moment. And really the aha realization for myself was that it was me. It was me who had created the life that I had been living. And so I said, okay, I've got to make some, changes, or I didn't even say I had to make, I already knew I needed to make changes, but the realization that all of it was kind of my doing was like hit me. And I had like this kind of overwhelming sense of a little bit of remorse and regret and sadness, because there was many people who were, kind of casualties in my unaware behavior. I had super blind spots that had kept me doing and repeating certain things over and over and over and over again. So anyway, that happens, and it's pretty much a pretty big breakthrough. It's like, whoa, okay, now I get it. And then you can, the healing could really begin from that point forward. So there was in early 2014, there were two major stories that had resulted out of that aha moment that really kind of set the stage for all this that happened. One, when I was 11, the roller skating rink story. And basically at that point, I stopped feeling and I stopped loving, and I didn't even want to talk about it. I put up a brick wall that said, okay, I'm not going to talk about it. Sorry, that's it. There's just it was non-negotiable in terms of, feeling and loving. And so I became this kind of separate. I became separate from I became this like individual, and boom, that was it. All right. And then 10 years later, I'm out in California, and my first job away from, the safety and environment that I had been, raised in and taken care of and successful in my own way that way. And I'm out there and I'm working away for the first year, and I get called into the office, and I'm thinking they're going to tell me what a great guy I am and how wonderful everything is. And they did say that. They did tell me I was a great guy and how wonderful everything was. But they also said, you're suffering from delusions of grandeur. And I didn't even know what it meant. Delusions of grandeur. I had to go home and look it up, and I realized that, I interpreted this like I have this like out of control belief and ego in myself that was that wasn't valid or wasn't true. And so what happened was I decided at that point, not consciously, but subconsciously, I decided that I would think everything. I would not trust spirit anymore. I had been operating that first year in California on intuition and just doing what I thought was the right thing to do based on everything I had learned up until that point. And it was, it was good, but it was like coming on a little too strong for these guys. And so I was told, okay, you're suffering from delusions of grandeur. So boom, big slap in the head and wake up. And so then I became like, I said, I'm not trusting my instincts any longer. I didn't say that at the time, but I can look back on it and now realize that's what happened. I thought I'm going to think things through. I'm going to dot every I and cross every T. I'm not going to trust my instincts any longer. And so I essentially cut off, spirit or the universe or source energy and said, it wasn't like it didn't come through. It kept coming through, but I would have to try to validate it with everything. So I was thinking about it and overthinking everything. Boom. Okay. So as a follow-up from that realization, I ended up doing this program that took me about 6 months. And you go through your rules and your beliefs and your values and your identity. Those were more internal. And then your vision, mission, purpose, goals, strategies, that was more externally focused. So it was kind of I was trying to think my way out of this whole box that I had put myself in. But in beliefs, there were 2 beliefs that I wrote down, and those were so impactful that to this day, they are seared into me, and we are all connected and there are no coincidences. We are all connected and there are no coincidences. So in 2014, I wrote those beliefs down. I said, those are my foundational beliefs. We're all connected and there are no coincidences. And they're really almost the exact same thing, right? If we're all connected, then there is no coincidences. Like the idea of a coincidence is like some random mystery thing happening. Well, anyway, I've come to believe like the law of attraction and understand all of that. And thoughts become things, and the whole quantum, the scientific basis. I became fascinated with quantum at that point. I think I was already a little bit fascinated by it, but I doubled down on it. And to this day, I keep learning more and more and more about that energetic and the science of it, the science which is now catching up to what had been considered more and only the spiritual world up until that point. All right. So now fast forward to last Friday, Christmas Day, and Spirituality Gone Wild is doing this 12-hour marathon, and people are coming in and out. And I was hosting, the first 8 hours of the show. I had said, okay, I'll go ahead and be the host. And so I was just hanging around, and I would introduce the new hour of whoever was coming on and either singing or entertaining or speaking or, some kind of a message. And I would just sort of do that transition from one hour to the next, or from the half hour, depending on how it was going. And so anyway, that was weird. I dropped out. My computer just dropped out. Hopefully, I don't know whether I stopped broadcasting or not, but anyway, here I am. Here we keep going. So last Friday, I was saying Christmas Day, I distracted myself with that little technology hiccup. All right. So last Friday, we're doing this. Well, I meet who is our guest, Victoria Reynolds, coming up in just a minute. And she is participating in the event, and you're just in there like the Zoom room, you're meeting people and you're saying hello to them, and we begin a conversation. And it turns out that we have this coincidence of where she was born and where I lived for the last 10 years when I was in Montana. And basically we're talking about like 1 mile apart from each other. And her story is odd enough or strange enough that like the fact that I was living right next to where she was is the foundation and the beginning of her story and her journey. So, if I hadn't done all of the spiritual work that I believe, I've done the last 10 years in the awakening and this understanding of the quantum and the connectedness, I would have thought, well, what a coincidence, except there are no coincidences. We are all connected. And so that's how I'm going to, bring Victoria into the show and welcome her. So, wow, Victoria, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, we're all connected, and there are no coincidences. So, I know you know that because of having read all the work you've been doing the last multiple years and that sort of thing. So, hey, before we get into it, and I let you say too much, I have two things that I like to do anytime a new guest comes. And the first thing is I like to just read a little bio on who they are. So we'll kind of do a formal introduction. And then I have a song that I play, and it's called the First Time Guest Welcoming Song. So it's sort of like a welcoming. So if we invite you back, we won't play the song ever again. So, all righty. Well, let me introduce you. So Victoria Reynolds is a self-described spiritual luminary, oracle of freedom, ascension activator, story healer, and author. We'll get into all of that. Victoria does what she does because she must. It is her calling and purpose to be a voice of freedom and share her light so that others may see the light within themselves. And I love you do what you do because you must. I had that same kind of moment. So we can talk about like when I went, no, I have to go do this. I can't not do this. I can't not do this. That was what I said. So Victoria was born into a polygamous cult. She was one of 16 plus children, and she ran away at age 17. The financial crisis of 2008 was her midlife crisis. Today, she lovingly calls her midlife she calls this her midlife rebirth. Midlife rebirth, much nicer way to frame that. It activated Victoria's higher purpose and up-leveled her spiritual gifts. Victoria is most proud of the work she has done on herself to find and become who she is today as a voice for spiritual freedom and infinite love. It's good stuff. I like it. By processing her own suffering, it has allowed her to be the light that she is today and assist others in finding their own freedom. Boy, we all need freedom. So thank you for that work. So Victoria Reynolds, welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show.
Thank you.
Now, let me play this song. We'll get that out of the way, and then we'll have the rest of the time to just sort of go through all this. Whoops, that's not it. That was here we go.
Like, I suddenly feel like I'm in the front of a parade.
Have you ever had a marching band welcome you to a show before?
I have never had a marching band welcome me to anything.
Well, very good. Well, good. Well, welcome. We just started this conversation, on Christmas Day, and like there was like pieces that just kept coming out that kind of brought us like closer and closer to like the connection that we do have. And it didn't take long to, discover that. But I ended up living in Montana for the last, 10, 12 years. And I left a year ago, but I ended up initially living in the town of Hamilton. And then I ended up in 2010, moving out to the very first property that I bought, and I called it the farmhouse property, and it sat up on the hill on the west side, and there was this little town that was about a half a mile the boundary from where the farmhouse property was, and that town was called is called Pinesdale. It has kind of had as a story that people don't necessarily talk a whole lot about. And you ended up growing up there. And when you grew up there, it wasn't even called Pinesdale initially. It was called The Ranch. So tell us a little bit about those first couple of years of your life.
Oh, it's funny. I'm trying to imagine which property you bought. That's how well I know that area. So I was born there. My parents moved to this place. At the time, I don't even think it was called The Ranch. It was 6 houses. And they moved there when my mom was pregnant with me. I have 4 other older siblings at the time. And my parents, my dad was extremely religious. I actually call him like a religious-aholic because he was so addicted to his religion that he basically couldn't see anything else. So when my mom was pregnant with me, my dad was introduced to some other men who lived in this community, and they were members of the normal Mormon church. Well, the Mormon church found out that he was consorting with these people in this community. They excommunicated both of my parents. Mm. The Mormon church does do that. People think Mormons are polygamous, but they're not, because they will excommunicate you really quick if they find out you are one. So my parents weren't polygamous, but they were consorting with polygamists. And because of just having a relationship with that, they were excommunicated from the church. So my parents moved there, and there were 6 houses, and that's the only life I knew for my entire life. I didn't, it's funny, I had this insight this morning that what's been happening in 2020 globally is kind of a macrocosm of how I grew up in this little teeny tiny community, because the women and children were not allowed to leave. We had all of our money was controlled by the religion. So my dad, we called it United Order, but my dad gave his paycheck to the leaders of the religion, and then they equally dispersed it amongst everybody else in the community. One of the things for me that I had an issue with is it seemed to me that some people were more equal than others because they had much nicer houses than we did. And all of the information that came in was controlled by the leaders of the community. And I grew up around all of these conspiracy theories that are like out there floating around the world right now. But when I was a kid, that's how I grew up. We were anti-vax, anti-medicine, anti-government, big on guns, and pretty much anti-anything that was the real world. So I grew up being terrified of anybody who wasn't a member of my community, and being told that if any strangers came into the community, not to talk to them because they would take our dads away. And because polygamy is illegal, they kind of overlook it now. But when I was a kid, they would actually put men in prison for polygamy. And the reason this community was created is because the prophet, so there wasn't even a name for my community, and there wasn't a name for my religion. It was just the Ranch and the All Red Group. And people asked me in high school, what's your religion? I was like, well, I don't know. The All Red Group didn't even have a name. It was just such a closed environment that I didn't know anything else. And as a child, it was great because we had a private community. We ran wild and climbed trees, and I'd disappear for hours at a time. And at 8 to 9 o'clock at night, I'd hear my mom calling my name, and that's when it was time to come home. But and it was fun because I knew everybody. It was such a small community. I knew everybody. I knew the neighbors' kids. I even knew their birthdays. I knew the birthdays of every person in the entire community, which is hysterical now because now with the smartphone, we don't even remember our own birthday. But Yeah. So as a child, it was a lot of fun, but then I started to really question things. My first questioning came when I was 4 years old.
Mm.
And there was a box of clothes that had been donated to us. So we were really, really poor. I mean, yeah, we were. I wore hand-me-downs, and my dad ran the community dairy, and so we sold the eggs and the milk and the cheese and stuff that he made, and we kind of got the leftovers that he didn't give to other people. And the leaders of the community paid us just enough to barely survive on. So, which is kind of communism, right? It's like a microcosm of communism, these little communities. And so we were barely scraping by. Even though there were other people that had, in my appearance, more than enough. So I was 4 years old, and we got this box of clothing. And at the bottom of this box was a magazine that I recognize now as a department store magazine. Do you remember they used to send out the really big Montgomery Ward and Sears magazines? And it was beautiful, and it was colorful, and the women in there looked so happy, and they had on pretty clothes. And I remember saying to myself, when I grow up, I want to be like those women. And I compared them to the women around me, and all the women around me were unhappy and miserable and yelling at their kids, and they wore these big, frumpy, ugly clothes. And I just knew I didn't want that. I didn't want what was around me, and I wanted what I saw in the magazine instead. And then when I was 4, not long after that, I broke my leg, and I was in the hospital for a month. And I liked being in the hospital so much more than being in my home. And the strangers in the hospital were so much more kind to me than the people in my community. And I remember being really confused because I had been told that the people in the outside world were for Satan, and that they would try to steal my soul. And that the people in my community were the people who were God's people who would take care of me. But my experience at 4 was completely the opposite, because the people in my community were so mean to me.
Yeah.
The strangers were so kind. This is very confusing. And I don't know, maybe I was more precocious than other kids, but I really analyzed that. And that kind of set the stage for me having an open mind and wanting to see what else is out there.
I remember reading one of your blog posts, or, I kind of scanned through all of that. You've written a lot, you've had a lot. So I couldn't go back and find it now, but it was almost heartbreaking to, you were talking about this little girl who was trying to be good. And yet they were saying, you're bad. And all you were doing was like letting your imagination and you were questioning things. You were just like trying to understand the way things worked. And yet you were being reprimanded and scolded for being a bad child, for being curious and questioning. So it was like I said, I read it and I was like, it was almost like it was sad. So anyway, so this community, I lived right next door to it, and I didn't know much about it when I bought this property, and then you kind of learn a little bit, but you learn a little bit by other people in the community telling you what's going on. And now this is in 2008, 9, 10 teens. So it's different today than it was then. And there's many people of your generation and even the next generation who are now, living out in the community, still connected with the town and with the beliefs, and yet they're sort of living what I would call a normal life, because the communism idea, just can't sustain everybody. So people have to just go out there and do their thing. So it's kind of and you meet people, and I met people, and you would have conversations, but there was like kind of a guardedness, and there was not like, you just knew that like they were part of what they were part of, and I was part of what I was part of, and there was like separation between us. And so even though on the surface we might have conversations and get to know people, and I actually knew some people better than others, and they were nice people, it was good that way, but that you can kind of tell that the system is unraveling because it's just not sustainable the way there's 6 original people who developed it envisioned it all working out. They have all these kids, and the kids want to anyway. So it's kind of crazy. Let's just leave it at that. It was kind of a crazy environment, and I saw that. So that's really where the connection kind of begins and ends, is this just that the physical location of it. I had my own experience with it. You had a much different experience. This is the first time I'm having this kind of a conversation with someone who really grew up in it. So what happened when you decided to leave? You were 17 years old and you just said, I'm had enough. I'm gone. What happened?
Yeah, I had some experiences that had led me to such severe depression that I wanted to commit suicide. And I thought that suicide was the only way out of my life. But I was so afraid of going to hell. Mm-hmm. It had ingrained hell into me so much that the frustrating thing is that the way that I grew up had fed so much guilt and shame into me that I kind of figured I was going to go to hell regardless, because I was a bad person. I had been I'd been raped, so I didn't have my most valuable possession, which was my virginity. I didn't have anymore. I just had so much guilt and so much shame about who I had become as a result of my life experiences. I knew nothing about choice. Like, I didn't even know there was such a thing as being able to make my own decisions. It's one of those strange things. Like, I grew up being told that, like, God has your life all planned out for you, and just to be a good person and don't worry about it, stay on the straight and narrow, but God's got it all planned out. And then that in heaven we had this big battle to be able to have free will choice, and I couldn't grasp where does my choice end and God's got it all planned out. Like, so if God had my whole life planned out, he already knew I was going to be a schmuck. He already knew all these horrible things were going to happen to me, which means before I was even born, God knew I was going to go to hell. So what was even the point? So I had gotten to that point where it was either stay there in my version of hell. And my dad both of my sisters were married at 17. My first sister, because my dad made her get married to a next door neighbor. My second sister, because she was so desperate to get out of my parents' house that she got married at 17. And so I was freaking out. I'm 17 years old. My dad was just crazy enough that he would make me marry one of the neighbors like he did with my sister, in my perspective at the time. And I hadn't told my parents about the sexual incidents that had happened to me. I didn't trust them enough to tell them. So I was in hell. And so my choice was either live in hell in my community, jump off a cliff and go to hell, or figure out how to get out and go to hell, because anyone who leaves a religion is called an apostate, and it's like a direct path to hell. So it was like, no matter what I do.
You had 3 roads to take and they all led to the same place.
Right. So I decided that, what happened is basically my inner voice started talking to me. And what my inner voice said to me is, what if everything you've ever been told is a lie? Mm. And that was just enough to keep me from jumping off the cliff. Mm-hmm. And then the next day I got a phone call from a friend who lived in Utah, and she said, if you can find a way out, I've got a place for you to stay. Mm. And that was enough to light a spark of hope.
And so you essentially at that point you escaped, you went down to Utah and you began a new life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It must have been, the initial shock of it, because suddenly you're being opened up to things that, like you're just being opened up to things that you just weren't even exposed to before, you didn't know about. And so you're like, it was like in a way it was a rebirth, but here you are 17 and you're learning things for the first time that other people, kind of grew up already knowing, from a younger age. And was there I can imagine there was a bit of a culture shock, and you felt like a fish out of water for the first few years.
Yeah, I have one.
Or maybe first few decades.
Not too bad. It was an adjustment process. The one incident that kind of stands out the most is the first time I went to a restaurant with some other kids my age, and they had got up and left some money on the table. And I said, "Hey, you guys, you left some money on the table." And they said, "Oh, it's a tip for the waitress." What? I had no idea what that was. I might have felt like a complete idiot because they had to explain to me what a tip was. But I'd never eaten in a restaurant before.
Yeah, there was I don't want to sidetrack you too much, but 2 or 3 years ago, I read a book by a woman who was in Idaho, and then she ended up going over to England, in Oxford. She studied, and she wrote a book about her whole family and growing up in a similar kind of an environment and community. So it's just amazing, and my hat's off to you that you've kind of took that foundation and you used it to become the person that you are today, and you wouldn't be able to do what you are doing today had you not had that experience. So there's not there's not like a bitterness or you've managed to process through. What did you say? You said the work you've done on yourself. I feel like I've been a bit of a student in terms of doing work on myself, and so I kind of related to that. But we don't want to become this person that just is constantly doing work on ourselves. We want to somehow learn to live with our past and become happy with it, so that we can then, really live heaven on earth and help others go through it. You got to a point where, you must have been living a somewhat normal life. But then 2008 came along, and you kind of had this, I know it was triggered by the financial crash, but at that point you had to kind of re-examine things, and it took you to another level of your life. Is there something before that we need to know about, or do you want to just kind of pick it up from there?
Oh, I had, I lived in Utah for, I want to say 5 or 6 years, and was, again, still very, very depressed. And then I took some classes. I got myself into the University of Utah, and I took some psychology classes and found out that the way that I felt, I thought I was crazy. Like, I thought they were going to put me in a nut farm if they found out all of the depression that I had inside. And then I found out that what I was feeling was perfectly normal, considering the way I grew up and what I had been through. And instead of going into blame, I went into thank God. At least if I could get this way, then I can possibly fix it. And then about the same time, I was introduced to the Centers for Spiritual Living. And I got introduced to self-help books through that Center for Spiritual Living. And that literally saved my life. For the first time in my life, I actually had a light inside of me, and I saw hope, and that got me on the path of self-improvement. And then I didn't see therapists. People don't realize, and this was the 1980s, that stuff wasn't covered by insurance. The therapist was considered quack medicine. Only celebrities saw therapy. And so I self-therapied for a long time. And then I ended up moving to California. I came to California because I was going to be an actress, and then realized I wanted nothing to do with that industry, awful film industry that it was. I don't know if it still is, but it was horrible for women in the 1980s. And I kept on this self-improvement path, but then not really, bud. I met my husband, and I got into the career path, and I completely forgot about spirituality. I let my self-improvement stuff go because I was focused on having babies. I had 2 kids, and I was reading the parenting books and going to the parenting classes and doing all this parenting stuff, and stopped working on myself. And I was doing the career path, so I was reading career books and stopped working on myself. And I basically became an atheist. Like, I wanted nothing to do with anything spiritual. And then one day, my daughter was about 6 years old. She said, "Mommy, the kids and I were talking at school about God." And I went off. I said, that is not a word that's allowed in our house. Daddy and I don't believe in God. And I call her my spiritual catalyst, and she started crying. And I said, okay, so it's not that we don't believe in God. It's kind of like Mother Nature. Like, that's just what came out my mouth. I couldn't speak for my husband because he still doesn't have an idea of what he thinks God is. And she said, oh, okay. She got it like that quick. And then I realized, oh, I probably should figure this out. Like, if we're going to start having these kinds of conversations, I should probably figure out what my belief is. And then a little bit after that, she told me that when she sleeps, that sometimes she leaves her body and she would go play with her angel friends. The word angel was never brought up in my house. I don't even know where she got the word from. But it really got me thinking that, wow. So right about that same time, 2008 happened. I owned a day spa, and it had childcare. So I was taking my 2 kids to the business with me, and then it all fell apart. I lost my business. My husband lost his business. We were literally came within 24 hours of losing our house. It actually had gone to auction, and we found a way to pull it back out. We had to file bankruptcy because between losing the 2 businesses, we were over $1 million in debt, and lost everything. We were down to $17 and the food in the fridge, and that was it. And so I was battling suicide again. And I just had decided that what I needed was to go outside and get some fresh air. So I started walking in the morning, and as I was out walking, my inner voice started talking to me again. And that's actually where my book Transcending Fear came from, where all the insights that what I call my inner therapist gave me to heal my life. And that's when spirituality showed up in my life again. And it unlocked these great gifts from when I was a child that I had been told were evil. I knew things. Like, I remember telling my mom one time the earth is like a school and that we're just here to learn. And she said, where on earth did you get that idea from? And I just said, I don't know. That makes sense to me. So I knew things, but whenever I would talk about them, I got shut down because it wasn't approved by my religion. So as I started going through this spiritual awakening that resulted of 2008, all of these gifts started coming back to me, and I started seeing how things work in the spiritual realm, what you were calling the quantum field, the spiritual realm, the etheric field. It's all the same. And I started seeing how in some ways science is actually closer to spirituality than religion is. It allowed me to see this expansive universe that my religion didn't allow me to see. It allowed me to have a one-on-one connection to source, to God, that my religion didn't allow me to have. And I realized that that's part of my purpose, is to teach other people how to connect directly to source, how to connect directly to their own light, rather than having to go through the middleman of religion.
In the monologue, I also talked about how my own experience where I felt like I was still connected, and yet I didn't trust it. I didn't trust source, and because of one incident that maybe I wasn't, maybe I misinterpreted something, or I interpreted it in a way that, or somebody else decided that they didn't like the way I interpreted it, and I ended up shutting that connection down. And it wasn't like I shut it down, but what I did was I stopped trusting it, and I would get the signals, but then I would have to, using the head and using the left brain and using the senses, I would try to make it real that way. And so it wasn't until, a couple of years ago that finally that whole story unraveled, and you go, oh, wait a minute. And I was thinking initially that I didn't even know how to connect the source any longer. And yet I did know all along. I just wasn't, in my case, I just wasn't trusting it. It was like, I'd get it. And then I'd go about this process of trying to analyze it all to death and figure it out and decide if it was right or wrong, instead of just trusting it and going with it. So.
Yeah. So the inspiration has to go through the ego filter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what I was doing. I was putting everything through the ego filter. And of course that didn't work.
Mm-mm.
No. So I had shown your book, Transcending Fear. Was that the first book that you wrote, Victoria?
That was the first book. Oh, sort of. So I started writing a book in the year 2000, which is hysterical. Go way back to the 1980s, and I started reading self-help books. I completely forgot about this until a couple of years ago. And I had said, someday I'm going to write a book that helps other people the way these books have helped me. That was a commitment that I had made to myself. But I had forgotten about that commitment until a couple of years ago. And I went, oh my gosh, I actually did that thing I said I was going to do all those years ago. And then in 2000, I started writing my memoirs. But what's funny is that book is still sitting, well, it still needs an editor and a really good publisher. And I haven't been able to figure out why that book hasn't gotten published until I realized that the timing now is so much better than if I would have published it earlier. So I'm actively now looking for somebody to publish my memoirs. The book Transcending Fear kind of pushed its way through the birth canal and came out first. That was my initial plan. That book came out in 2012, and it's the process that my inner therapist gave me for healing my life. I started writing it in notebooks in 2009, right? And I didn't realize it was a book until I took it out of my notebooks and started putting it in my computer. And then I realized that it would actually turn into a process that I call the process. But that wasn't initially, it was just my notes to myself.
Yeah.
I had no idea it was going to be a book. So that came out in 2012. I started writing it, it takes a couple of years for a book to become a book. And I just finished the 10-year anniversary edition that has finished editing, but it still needs to go to a publisher. So that one's probably not going to be available for probably another 6 months based on how long it takes for the publishing process. And it's basically the same thing as a pre-existing book, except that it's got a seventh chapter that's not included in the original book.
And is this Free Your Spirit? Is this your memoir or no?
No, that's another book. So I just this past month published 3 more books: Free Your Spirit, Rise Up, and Own Your True Worth. Yeah.
So what is Free Your Spirit? I love the the picture of you on the beach with the sword. Your spirit is alive and well.
Yeah, and that was actually really fun. That particular photo session, I was wearing an evening gown on the beach, which was hysterical, but it just so suits who I am inside and out. That book is again not my memoir. It's another self-improvement book that is based on learning how to trust your own path and being comfortable with letting go of the beliefs that what I call hand-me-down beliefs, being able to trust our own connection to spirit rather than thinking that we have to live our lives based on the shoulds that other people have put on us.
Now one of the book that I read was The Rise Up, and I saw this on your website, and I just was able to download the copy that you generously are giving away. And this is almost like a manifesto of a sorts. It goes through and it gives a bunch of definitions. And what was really neat about it was all things that I could relate to, and yet I hadn't ever. All of the definitions of the terms and the way the world is working right now today, I was able to relate to, but I never quite saw anybody do what you did in putting together a complete list of this. I mean, did this all come out of your head? This is pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, and that book actually birthed itself really quick. I just started writing it a couple of months ago. It was just like, okay, people need to know what's going on. This particular book is a very present book. it's about what's happening in the world right now.
Right.
And it just pushed itself out. It was like, okay, people need to know what this is really all about. And the reason that I wrote it is because we are living in such a space of division right now. And in order for us to create this heaven on earth that we all want to create, we have to figure out how to unify. We can't fall for the division that's trying to keep us from being unified. So when I wrote the book, it's about what's happening in the world right now, that we actually are in the middle of the ascension process. It's not a Jesus shows up in a cloud of lights thing. It's actually a process, not an instant thing. And that we're all being called to be the people who want to make the change happen in the world. And so it's about that. But I created the glossary of terms because there's so many terms being thrown around out there that people think they know what they are based on the media that's being shared, based on what's happening, the social media and these groups that people are part of, but they're not seeing the whole picture. And I wanted to create something where people could actually see the whole picture and be able to see these terms from an expanded perspective, not just what people are being told they are. And so, yeah, it's all from my own personal experience, or I'll tune into Spirit and ask Spirit to explain to me what a particular term means. And it's the whole entire book basically is written to teach people how to see from a bigger perspective, so that we can get past the division that we're in and be able to come into unity and become unified to create the kind of world we want to live in.
The American Gumption Project was born about a year and a half ago. I was still in Montana. I knew my time was coming to an end there. I had been there for for 10 years. And what happened when I got to Montana was it just fell apart. Like the original plan that took me to Montana almost fell apart immediately upon getting there. And so I had to rebound and come up with a new plan. And yet I wanted to hold on to a lot of the old plan. And so the 10 years of Montana was really about learning to let go and decide what I really wanted to do. And I knew I needed to go in a different direction, and yet I was not letting go. So when I finally made the decision that, like, okay, it's time to go forward, go back out into the world, because it was like kind of like a little retreat. Montana was. It was like a hiding safe place for looking at the mountains and healing, and then go out there. Well, American Gumption was born because I was watching the news one day and I went, oh my gosh, everything that they're talking about, that they're breathlessly talking about, that's so important, has absolutely nothing to do with my life. And it has nothing to do with any of the people that I interact with on a regular basis. And I had that like connection and realization. And I went, all they're doing is telling, unhappy stories, bad stories, fear-based stories. And I thought there has to be a market for good stories. And American Gumption, the original intention was I'm going to drive around, live on the road in an RV for the next, 4 to 7 years. And I'm going to meet people a la Forrest Gump. I'm going to be just out there doing my thing, meeting people and telling good stories and happy stories. And that's still the intention. And of course, this year I ended up back east with family, and I started this show virtually to kind of kickstart it. And so that's still the plan to go out there. But it was based on the same things that you talk about in Rise Up, in that there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of propaganda that's going on, and it's just not healthy. And it's almost comical, when I look at it now that I've kind of like gotten a better perspective on it. I look at it and like I hear what the news is saying, and I go, this is just silly. And these people are selling out their souls for a paycheck. It's very sad. So anyway, it's all changing. And your book, Rise Up, a free copy, people can go and get it. And very well done. Very well done. Yeah. So we're just coming up to the top of the hour. We only have a few more minutes left. I mean, what is next in your life? Where are you going? You've been a speaker. You've done, more of the business track. You kind of evolved into the spiritual track. You've written now a few books. I mean, where do you see yourself, going in the next couple of years with all of the work you're doing?
It's funny that you asked that, because I've been sitting with that the last couple of weeks, and what Spirit keeps telling me is, something entirely new. I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to sit and be patient and see what that is. I still have other books in the pipeline that I need to finish. I still have some projects to finish, but apparently there's something completely different in the works for me, and I don't know what it is. I'm asking my ego to just set aside and let inspiration do its thing, telling my ego it's cool, I got you, we're safe. I have no idea what this next thing is. I'm just gonna sit and see.
Anyone familiar with the law of attraction and with Abraham Hicks knows about the art of allowing, and so you are practicing the art of allowing and letting it come. I like that. We met on Christmas Day on the Spirituality Gone Wild show. What was your connection to that group? I mean, how did you arrive there that day?
So I have a very good friend. Her name is Kathy Mason. I've known her. We actually met at an event years ago. We were both learning how to be seen on TV, interestingly enough. And we've stayed friends this entire time. Just there's the connection of magic, right? We're both magical people. And so she invited me. She said, we're doing this show. It's for people who are home alone on Christmas. And this was the first time I've ever been home alone on Christmas. And I won't get into that story. But some decisions that I made in the last couple of months had me home by myself on on Christmas. And you guys kept me company.
Great. Well, we were glad that you joined us, and I'm glad that we had a chance to get to meet. And I only met Kathy in the last couple of months, as she has stepped up the work she's doing with Spirituality Gone Wild, and Debbie G, who is the founder of Spirituality Gone Wild. Debbie invited me to be part of the group. I was like ready to start a show like independent, just all on my own. And Debbie came along, and I thought, oh, gee, I had been doing all this development work for the last 10 years myself, and I was a good student. I never thought of myself as a teacher. And I said to Debbie, hey, I don't feel like I have anything to teach the people. And yet she said, well, it's Spirituality Gone Wild. What do you want to do? I said, well, I would like to just do an interview show where I interview people, and I can get to continue to be a student, and I learn from people. So anyway, that's sort of how it worked. But the organization is growing, and lots of things coming up, and Kathy Mason's gotten involved. So we're glad that she invited you to join us on Christmas Day, and stay tuned for the good things to come. And we'll look forward to hearing where you go with this.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely stay in touch.
Anything last message for people as they, what do you say to someone who is like beginning to realize that, all the things I've been told aren't adding up. I need to dig a little deeper. I mean, what is you must have some resources. I think we should invite them to come to your website, look around, but what message would you like to share with folks?
I would say more than anything is to question everything. Don't be afraid to question. Because when you start to question what the status quo and what's being put out in front of you, it opens the mind up to new possibilities. And our entire world for thousands of years has been about controlling the narrative. And when you allow yourself to step out of the box of the narrative and see what else is out there, you can actually have a direct connection to source and to spirit. Spirit will actually start to guide you, and allow yourself to be guided by that, rather than assuming that what you're seeing and what you're hearing is the whole story. So don't be afraid to question. And if you start questioning, then you'll start to be guided in the direction where spirit wants you to go. So.
Well, very good. Thank you, Victoria. Victoria's website, victoriareynolds.com. There's resources there for you to learn about. There's some free things to get you started. There are her books, links to her books, and other meditations and courses that you have coming up. So keep up the great work. Please come back and join us sometime in 2021 and update us on what's going on in your life. So
I will. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been fun.
All righty. See you next time, Victoria. Have a great 2021.
Yes.
All right. Well, that was fun. I met Victoria, and because we're all connected, and because there are no coincidences, you see different people, and you just reach out, and you make a connection. And in some ways, I was thinking about this morning. It's almost easier to make friends and be connected with people, through Zoom meetings, because it's like we feel like we're disconnected, and yet here we were able to make a connection, and then find out we had this strong connection, and then I'm grateful she decided to come and join us and share her story. Very inspirational, and keep up the great work, because the old systems that we have in our world are coming to an end, and COVID this year has kind of changed everything, and so people are looking around and going, what is the truth? So anyway, that was her word. Her last word was just question things and figure things out and decide for yourself. Don't necessarily believe what you're being told, because it's crazy. All righty, that's it. I'm going to wrap up today's show, and we'll get ready for tomorrow's show. Walt Keller, our Hollywood actor, joining us tomorrow. He just moved there in his late 40s a couple years ago to become a Hollywood actor, and he did it. So he'll tell us his story from Denver to LA. And then Friday we have our new spiritual, and I'll post a link in American Gumption. We'll have a training on Friday afternoon, New Year's Day in the afternoon, an hour or two. A couple of the different co-creators with Spirituality Gone Wild are going to start to share, and we're going to end up doing that every Sunday in 2021. So that'll become kind of a regular thing that happens on Sunday. Monday, Joan of Angels will be bringing her monthly segment to the end of the show. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a guest beforehand, but I'll figure that out. And then on Tuesday, Paul Sterling, the relationship coach and the author of the book, Argue Less and Love More. Now, how about that for relationship advice? Argue less and love more. Yeah, let's tune in on Tuesday to find that out. Alrighty, everybody, have a great day. Tomorrow we come back, Walt Keller, show number 100. Proud of that fact. So that was an accomplishment. So we will see you all tomorrow. And Bettina, thanks for joining in and being part of the show, as you always are with your comments. We appreciate you and your insights. Alrighty, everybody, we'll see you tomorrow.